Before we jump into today's fascinating topic, just a quick, inspiring reminder for all of you listening. We really encourage you to dive deeper into dialogues that matter, right here with the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
Absolutely. Help spark that curiosity. Join a community of, lifelong learners. Liking, sharing, subscribing, it makes a huge difference.
It really does. And while you're there, explore the existing rich tapestry of conversations we've already put together in the All Sorts podcast library. There's some great stuff.
Definitely worth revisiting. And hey, let's connect beyond just the audio. You can follow the All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads.
Yeah, we promise insights, maybe some behind-the-scenes glimpses, and just a really vibrant community conversation.
So welcome, everyone. Today, this deep dive is specially crafted for you, looking into echo chambers and cognitive bias.
We're aiming to get a much sharper lens on why, the information we often see and accept, well, it fits so neatly with what we already believe.
Yeah, we've gone through quite a bit of material trying to pull out the most important nuggets about these two concepts, which are really quite interconnected.
Right. So the mission today is basically to give you a clear, insightful understanding of how these things, echo chambers, cognitive biases, actually work, and maybe more importantly, the kind of impact they can have.
Okay, so where should we start? Echo chambers.
Yeah, let's start there. When we talk about an echo chamber, especially like in media or online, what are we actually picturing?
Okay, so imagine a kind of, a space.
Yeah.
Often it's online, but it doesn't have to be. And within this space, information just circulates. It gets repeated, reinforced.
By people who already agree.
Exactly. By a network of people who are, like-minded. It creates this closed loop.
Okay.
And the potential downside, the real negative side, is that through this constant repetition, just hearing the same things over and over within that group, well, even pretty extreme ideas or maybe stuff that isn't fully backed up,
Right.
it can start to feel like it's just true, like established fact.
Yeah. So it's different from just being, say, in an epistemic bubble where maybe you just don't happen to hear opposing views. This sounds more deliberate.
That's a really important distinction, yeah. An epistemic bubble, as some call it, might just happen because, your social circle is limited or you just haven't stumbled across certain information. It's often unintentional omission.
Okay.
An echo chamber, though, that involves something more active, there's often an active exclusion, even a discrediting of voices and information that come from outside the group's accepted narrative.
Wow. So they're actively pushing away conflicting ideas.
Pretty much. It makes them incredibly strong, these echo chambers. A key part is this preemptive distrust that gets built up between the members inside and anyone outside who thinks differently.
So if evidence comes from an outsider, it's dismissed just because of the source.
Often, yes. It makes them highly resistant to counter evidence. You can see this kind of dynamic playing out in bigger societal things, too, like these so-called culture wars.
Ah, right. Where different groups have really conflicting values.
Exactly. Those conflicts get amplified. And social media echo chambers, they can definitely play a role in circulating those conversations, often fueling them through conflict itself.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The internet was supposed to give us access to everything, all perspectives.
Right. And in theory, it does. It's massively expanded access to all sorts of information, political stuff included. It could create this amazing space for, pluralistic debate. But that same access allows for what researchers call selective exposure. We as humans tend to gravitate towards information and channels that support what we already believe.
We seek out agreement.
We often do. And when you think about the scale, billions of people on Facebook every month, millions of tweets, the potential for that selective exposure to harden into real echo chambers is huge.
And the platforms themselves, the way they work with algorithms, does that play into it?
Oh, definitely. There's a real interplay there.
Yeah.
Social media algorithms are designed basically to learn from what we do online. What we click on, what we like, what we share. They learn our preferences. So if you consistently interact with one type of content, one viewpoint, the algorithm goes, they like this, and it shows you more of the same.
Which narrows what we see over time.
Precisely. It can narrow that information landscape and, potentially reinforce the walls in echo chamber without us even realizing it's happening.
Okay, so that's the environment. The echo chamber itself may be helped along by algorithms. But what about us? Why are we drawn to these spaces? That's where cognitive bias fits in, isn't it?
Exactly right. Cognitive bias is the psychological foundation, you could say. At its core, it's just a tendency for our brains to lean towards or away from something. to favor or disfavor.
And where does that come from?
It stems from, well, everything. Our personal experiences, how we perceive the world, our existing viewpoints, all of that shapes these biases. And they have a huge influence on our thoughts, our behavior, the judgments we make every day.
And it's not always something we're doing on purpose.
That's key. Biases can be conscious. We might intentionally look for news that supports our candidate, for example. But a lot of bias is unconscious or implicit. It operates under the radar without us deliberately planning it.
So our brains are sort of wired for this. Is there a reason?
Well, yes, in a way. Think about the work of Tversky and Kahneman. They showed how we rely on these mental shortcuts heuristics, especially when we're facing uncertainty or need to make a quick judgment.
Like rules of thumb.
Exactly. They're often efficient, help us navigate the world quickly.
Yeah.
But they can also lead to systematic, predictable errors in thinking. And those predictable errors, that's what we call cognitive biases.
Okay. Can you give us some common examples? Like what kinds of biases are we talking about?
Sure. Probably the most famous one is confirmation bias. That's our tendency to actively seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe.
And ignore stuff that doesn't fit.
Or downplay it, yeah. Then there's hindsight bias. You know that feeling after something happens where you think, oh, I knew it all along? That's hindsight bias.
Huh. Yeah, I know that one.
There's also anchoring bias. That's where we rely way too heavily on the very first piece of information we get, that first number, that first impression. It anchors our thinking.
Okay.
Then representativeness bias. This is where we judge something based on how similar it seems to a stereotype we already hold, like judging a book by its cover, essentially.
Got it.
And one more, availability bias. We tend to overestimate the importance or likelihood of things that easily spring to mind, things that are readily available in our memory, maybe because they were recent or vivid.
Right, like fearing plane crashes more than car crashes, even though statistically.
Exactly, because the plane crashes are more dramatic, more memorable, more available in our minds.
Okay, so you can really see how these biases,
Yeah.
especially something like confirmation bias, would make us susceptible to echo chambers. It's like they pull us in.
They absolutely do. Confirmation bias acts like this. Gravitational pull towards information and people that just validate what we already think. And once you're inside an echo chamber,
It gets stronger.
yeah, the social reinforcement kicks in. Everyone around you agrees, they like the same things, share the same articles. It strengthens those initial biases. It makes you feel more certain you're right.
And makes it easier to dismiss anything from the outside.
Much easier. That outside information seems wrong or biased itself because it doesn't fit the consensus you're constantly experiencing.
And that must create a skewed sense of reality, like thinking everyone agrees with you, or at least most people.
Precisely. That's what's known as the false consensus effect, or FCE. When you're mainly exposed to opinions that align with yours, like inside an echo chamber, you naturally tend to overestimate how common your beliefs actually are in the wider world.
Has that been, like, studied?
Oh, yes. Research definitely shows a link.
Yeah.
People whose online social networks are very homogenous, meaning full of like-minded people, tend to show a stronger false consensus effect.
So our social media feeds, which are often tailored by those algorithms we talked about, they're not just reflecting the echo chamber, they're actively shaping our perception within it.
Exactly. Those curated feeds become like artifacts of the echo chamber. If your feed is mostly stuff you agree with, and it's getting lots of likes and shares, it creates this impression of widespread agreement.
Even if it's just agreement within that specific bubble.
Right. Now, interestingly, some studies show people can be a bit skeptical. If something gets a ton of likes, especially if it's a topic they care about, they might suspect some manipulation or, bandwagon effect.
So we're not totally naive about likes meaning deep agreement.
Not always, no.
Yeah.
There can be some resistance or skepticism.
Yeah.
But the overall effect, especially with the messages themselves being consistently agreeable, that still tends to strengthen the false consensus effect.
So repeated exposure to agreeable messages, even if we're slightly wary of the likes, still makes us think our view is more common.
Generally, yes. Exposure to those feeds dominated by congruent messages tends to lead to a stronger FCE.
Wow. Okay, this connects biases, the online environment.
Yeah.
What about the algorithms themselves? Can they become biased?
Absolutely. That's a huge area of concern right now. Algorithmic bias. Machine learning algorithms. The AI that powers so much online. They learn from data. And where does that data come from?
Us, our behavior, our history.
Exactly. Human experiences, human decisions, human biases. So if the data used to train an algorithm reflects existing societal biases, the algorithm can essentially learn and then perpetuate those biases.
So algorithmic bias is like human cognitive bias baked into the code.
That's a good way to put it. It's often defined as erroneous assumptions made in the machine learning process that stem from human cognitive bias and how the data was collected, selected, or used.
And this has real-world consequences, right? It's not just theoretical.
Oh, absolutely. There are many concerning examples. Facial recognition technology has shown higher error rates for darker-skinned women compared to lighter-skinned men, likely due to biased training data.
Wow.
Gender bias has been found in job advertisements shown on platforms like Facebook, where certain jobs are disproportionately shown to one gender.
Right.
There was the Companos algorithm used in some U.S. courts.
The one predicting recidivism, reoffending risk.
That's the one. Studies showed it was more likely to falsely flag black defendants as high risk compared to white defendants. And Amazon famously had to scrap an AI recruiting tool because it learned bias against women.
Why? How did that happen?
Because it was trained primarily on resumes submitted over the previous 10 years, which mostly came from men. So it essentially learned that male candidates were preferable.
That's sobering. And how do echo chambers tie into this algorithmic bias?
They can create a nasty feedback loop. Echo chambers provide skewed data sets to the algorithms everyone interacting likes the same biased thing. The algorithm learns this bias, then serves up more biased content back into the echo chamber, reinforcing it.
Amplifying the bias in a closed system.
Exactly. It's a cycle. Biased data leads to biased algorithms, which leads to biased outputs, which then get amplified within the echo chamber, potentially generating even more biased data.
Okay, this all sounds quite daunting, but presumably there are things we can do. Strategies to avoid getting trapped or to mitigate these biases.
Yes, thankfully there are. It starts with awareness, as always. Just knowing about confirmation bias is the first crucial step. Recognizing that tendency in ourselves.
Just being aware you might be doing it.
Right. Then actively making an effort to seek out external neutral opinions. Talk to people outside your usual circle, people who maybe don't have a strong stake in your viewpoint. Get a fresh perspective.
That makes sense. What else?
In group settings, or even just in your own thinking process, you could try appointing a devil's advocate, someone whose specific role is to challenge the prevailing ideas, to poke holes in the argument.
Even if they secretly agree.
Even if they agree. The point is to force the consideration of alternatives and weaknesses. Similarly, forming diverse teams or groups is powerful. Different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of thinking that naturally balances out individual biases, creates a marketplace of ideas.
Like bringing different biases together cancels them out a bit.
Or at least makes them visible and forces discussion, yeah.
What about the platforms? Can they help?
They certainly have levers they could pull. Things like trying to control the spread of known low-credibility sources, maybe by suspending them or reducing their visibility, and actively working to diversify the information people see, not just feeding them more of the same.
Nudging us out of the rut.
Kind of. And related to that is promoting algorithmic bias literacy. We, as users, need to understand how these algorithms work and how they can be biased.
So we don't just blindly trust the feed.
Exactly. Encouraging a more critical evaluation of online information is key. Maybe platforms could even subtly nudge users towards that critical thinking.
And what about interacting with people we disagree with? Is that helpful?
Research suggests it can be, yes. Increasing partisan heterogeneity, basically, talking more with people across the political divide, seems potentially helpful.
How so?
Some studies found that being in partisan echo chambers increased both disagreement on policy issues and negative feelings, like animosity, towards the other side, compared to being in groups with mixed political views.
So talking to the other side might actually reduce the hostility, even if you still disagree on policy.
Potentially, yes. Interestingly, in one UK-based study, the biggest impact on reducing that negative feeling, what they call effective polarization, was seen among supporters of the opposition party at the time. But the general idea holds. Cross-partisan discussion might help cool things down a bit.
Okay, so bringing it all together, the main takeaway seems to be.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that these echo chambers, which are really fueled by our own natural cognitive biases and then potentially supercharged by algorithms, they can seriously warp our understanding of reality.
They shape what we think is true, what we think is important.
Exactly. And that could really contribute to the polarization we see, making it harder to have productive conversations, harder to find common ground.
It definitely puts the onus on us as individuals to be more mindful about how we consume information.
It really does. It encourages us to maybe reflect a bit. Think about your own information diet, How varied are your sources? Are you ever deliberately looking for views that might challenge you?
Stepping outside the comfort zone of agreement.
Precisely.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening to chew on. In this world that's so heavily shaped by our online lives, our online interactions, how can we proactively make an effort to cultivate intellectual curiosity? How do we actively challenge our own biases, the ones that feel so natural? And ultimately, how do we foster perspectives that are more nuanced, more understanding,
Yeah.
both for ourselves and, collectively?
That's the big question, isn't it? Thank you for exploring all these complex layers with us today.
And a huge thank you for tuning into the deep dive. If today's exploration into echo chambers and cognitive biases got you thinking, please dive deeper into dialogues that matter over on the All Sorts Podcast YouTube channel.
Yeah, like the video, share it, subscribe, become part of that community. And definitely check out the back catalog, that rich tapestry of illuminating conversations we mentioned.
Absolutely. And don't forget, keep the conversation going beyond just listening. Follow the All Sorts Podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. Stay connected, get those extra insights.
Be part of the ongoing dialogue.
Until our next deep dive, keep questioning, keep exploring.
And keep those minds open.